This is the Jeff McLeod Show, where we talk about God, America, the things that make our country great, and so much more. Where we talk about God, America, the things that make our... Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you've had a great week so far, and I hope you've had a great Thursday. We're back with another video. I know I've been missing a couple times this week and last week, but it was due to some storage issues on my phone and traveling, but I'm glad to be back. And there was some pretty big news that happened yesterday regarding the Israeli-Hamas conflict. It seems like it has come to an end after 2 years. So everyone at this point is familiar with it. I haven't really talked about it much for that reason. But 2 years ago, on October 7th, 2023, Hamas began a brutal invasion of southern Israel and ended up abducting many Israelis, and also ended up brutally murdering many Israelis that were at a concert or were in the local area. And Israel began a war, just like the United States would have if it had happened to the United States. So Israel has been going on in this war for the last 2 years. Of course, they struck Iran this year. They attacked Hezbollah, and they've attacked different countries recently, trying to bring peace and stability to their country and ending outside threats. And it seems like they've done that. So Hamas and Israel finally agreed to a hostage deal. Basically, what's kept this going on for so long is that there were many hostages. So the hostages would get killed if Israel tried rescuing them. And a few of them, I believe, did. There was an Israeli mission that failed once, and several hostages were killed. So they were trying to be very, very careful. I'm going to give you my opinion, since I haven't yet on the show, about what I think about Israel, what I think about Hamas, because obviously I know there's many mixed opinions, and I think undeservedly so. So I want to start off with what I think is not great that Israel does, right? So I don't think it's great that they have one of the highest homosexual rates in the world. I don't think it's great that they mandated the COVID-19 COVID shot. I don't think it's good that they also limited free speech. I don't think it's good that there's emergency powers that Netanyahu has. And also, if there were churches destroyed, all that type of stuff that happens in war, I'm not for that. However, I want to say that Israel was not the violator of this attack. For anyone to say that Israel deserved it, that they have been brutally mistreating Palestinians for the last 80 years, that's an utter lie. Palestinians have rights. There are many Arabs, there are over 1 million Arabs that live in Israel, and they are afforded the same exact rights as Israeli citizens. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. We know that, right? All the other ones are Muslim dictatorships. You can go to Yemen, Oman, Qatar, however you want to say it, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait. You can go on, and you can discuss the different Muslim dictatorships that are largely controlled by leaders who have complete control of the entire countries. So Israel is not the bad guy in this conflict. And Israel is not the bad guy in this conflict with Hamas. There used to be a day in America where we believed in standing up to bullies. And we did it on 9/11. And people question whether 9/11, whether we should have gone and attacked in Iraq. And I have my doubts about it. I think looking back, it was a no-win war, so we shouldn't have. However, if we were attacked brutally by Mexico, we would have responded just like Israel did, and we probably would have used even more extreme force. And because we're one of the most powerful nations in the world, we would have gotten away with it. Israel this has been long and drawn out. So in my opinion, Netanyahu should have fought this, and it should have been over quicker. Just my personal opinion. He should have actually been more extreme, and if he had been more extreme, probably more lives would have been saved, right, for the Palestinian side. But the Palestinians have been the aggressors. The Palestinians in 2006, they voted for Hamas to have leadership. Many of the Palestinians, they personally held some of these people who were captured by Hamas, and they brutally tortured the Israelis. So for you to say, for anyone to say that Israel is the bad guy in this conflict, you're ignoring some pretty significant facts. I know as a traveler, do people travel more to Israel, or do they travel as Americans to other countries in the Middle East? more people would travel to Israel. And I get a lot of it is because there are many faiths that converge at Jerusalem. Most do, right? Islam, Christianity, and Catholicism and Judaism all converge there. But there's more than that. All the other Islamic countries, they're not safe if you go there. With the exception, there's some exceptions of Jordan, but Israel, by and large, has been a beacon of democracy in an otherwise dark part of the world. So I am for Israel. Do I disagree with them on some things they do? Absolutely. I don't agree with everything the government of Israel does. But as a Christian, I believe it's my duty to respect the territorial land that God gave Israel. You can go back to the Abrahamic covenant, and I'm not saying God gave it to the government of Israel. That's not what I'm saying. I can criticize the government, but God gave it to the people of Israel, and ultimately they're going to get that land one day, and they're going to have a larger swath of land, and that was given to them by God. So we should protect the territorial integrity of their country. I'm not saying stand up for all their leaders and what all their leaders do, and I'm not saying we should go on the offensive for Israel and just give them tons of money. That's not what I'm saying. But we should stand up. We should realize as a Christian that that's the land that God gave Israel. We don't have to support the government, but we should support the Jews' right to exist because Jesus was a Jew. So we are going to continue on, and I'm going to talk about the specific parts of this deal. There are some things I don't like about it, and there are some things I like about it. So clearly, President Trump did a good job initiating. Basically, there needed to be a middleman between Israel and Hamas, and this is being negotiated right now in Egypt. So the Egypt and the United States is a middleman. So what happened is Israel would not talk to Hamas. Hamas would not talk to Israel. So you needed a third party who could speak with both sides. Hamas will not speak to the United States, really. So Qatar, Egypt, some other countries were intermediaries between the sides. So really, it's not even three parties. You almost have 4 or 5 parties involved to relay all the messages and to agree to certain aspects of the deal. Definitely, Israel gets the better end of this deal because the Palestinians were up against a wall, Hamas specifically, because they're in charge. They knew if they continue fighting this fight, Gaza, it's already mostly destroyed. It will be completely destroyed, and all the Hamas's leadership, most of which has already been killed, the remainder of it will be killed as well. So they wanted to be able to at least be alive and keep their lives. So that's why I believe they agreed to this deal. They have their backs up against a wall. There's no other option. And they know the rest of the world is looking at this, and Europe is looking at this. Europe has recognized the Palestinian state, much of it, and they're realizing if we don't accept this deal, we're going to look bad to the rest of the world. So one thing I can give Hamas and I can give the Muslim community is they are better optically a lot of the times than what Israel does. From an optics perspective, they're very good at playing the victim, as are a lot of people in America, having a victim mentality when in reality, they created the mess that they're in, much of it at least. So they've been good at that on the world stage. Israel has not. Israel needed to end the war, in my opinion, a year ago, but the rest of the world tied their hands and they were trying to preserve life. And in the process of trying to preserve life and limit bloodshed and limit warfare, they actually dragged it out and probably caused more death than what would have happened if they had just finished it pretty quickly. So the specific deals that have been agreed to thus far, and mind you, this situation's ongoing. So this is phase 1. There are 3 total phases. Phase 1 is basically releasing hostages from both the Israeli and Palestinian side. Phase 2 is disarming Hamas. And stage 3 is, I believe, setting up some form of government in that area, whether it's an Arab nation that helps govern that area. I'm not really sure what that plan is exactly yet. So let's begin. A ceasefire or pause in fighting has been agreed by both sides. I believe it takes place on Thursday, October 9th. So when you're watching this right now, I actually record the evening prior. This should have already happened because Israel is 7 or 8 hours ahead of the U.S. Eastern Time. So this should have already happened. And who knows, maybe it falls through in the meantime. Maybe things are changed a little bit. This happens in negotiations. But as of right now, the ceasefire has been agreed to. There will be a hostage release. So Hamas will free or begin freeing Israeli hostages. Right now, it's estimated that there are 48 Israeli hostages that will be released. That's all that's left. It's rumored that 20 are alive and 28 are dead. That could be, I actually think it will probably be higher because these people were not fed well for 2 years. They were basically in a prison. I don't know if there's any women left. I know there was an agreement to try getting most of the women out of there, but there definitely was abuse and torture. So I feel awful for whoever is alive because that's a scar that you're going to carry the rest of your life. You're going to have PTSD, and it's so traumatic. So they're going to be released. Hamas is going to get, or the Palestinians, are about 1,950 prisoners will be released. 250 of them are that are prisoners in Israel and are serving life sentences. The remainder are people that are Palestinians that are in custody. So they're in jail awaiting sentences. So 1,950 of them approximately will be released. And this is preliminary data. So that is one thing I want to mention. Hamas and the Palestinians always get the better end of these deals. It's because Israel values life. Let's think about that. Israel values life. They're willing to give up many more Palestinian prisoners in exchange for very few of their own people. And Hamas in Palestine, the Palestinians, they're not willing to do the same thing. Like if Israel said, we'll give you 3 of your prisoners right now, but release all the hostages, they would never do that because they don't value life. That's another point on Israel's side. Israel values life. The fact that they value life, they've tried rescuing these people. There was one successful attempt, one failed attempt. They've had several different negotiations where there was a temporary ceasefire and people were released every so often, maybe every 24 hours or so. So Israel values life much more than Hamas does because to Hamas, their people are expendable, right? They're not protecting the Palestinians if they're building tunnels underneath vital infrastructure such as hospitals, churches, schools. And you can blame Hamas for those deaths, those Palestinian deaths. What else was Israel supposed to do? Just let those tunnels stay and let there be a mass amount of weapons underneath? Obviously, those buildings had to be destroyed. And obviously, you're putting civilians in harm's way when you build military tunnels underneath vital infrastructure. So the next part is Israeli troop withdrawal. Israel will pull back forces from much of Gaza to a pre-agreed line. So I believe this is in stages. So Israel is systematically working their way back and withdrawing from Gaza. And as this is happening, prisoners will be released. When a certain number of set prisoners are released, hostages are released, then Israel, I think, withdraws further. And that's being decided. This is not completely out yet. Humanitarian aid flow. The deal envisions large-scale humanitarian access into Gaza, trucks of aid, fuel, rebuilding supplies. There's plenty of food going into Gaza. I want to say that. That's a misnomer that the Palestinians are starving. That's not true. However, Gaza is destroyed. There aren't many building structures left in place. If you look at a map of Gaza from 2023 to a current map in 2025, you can see nearly all the vital infrastructure was destroyed. There's 2.5 million people living in Gaza, so it's the third most densely populated part of the world. So to begin with, there wasn't a lot of space. Now, only about 25% of the buildings are left that were left 2 years ago. So the population is concentrated in about 25% of Gaza. So Gaza needs to be rebuilt pronto, and this is all Hamas's fault. They forced the vital infrastructure to be destroyed. So they were using the Palestinians as human shields, essentially. Withdrawal from dense areas and dismantling sites. The framework described phased withdrawal from urban and military contested areas. So the Gaza Valley, Netzarim access, and dismantling of military installations in those areas. So it has to be completely dismantled, I guess, from both sides. And there needs to be almost like a border where neither sides have weapons, right? And that needs to be done. Restoration of movement and return of displaced. Over time, displaced persons will be allowed to return, and there would be freedom of movement within Gaza. So right now, there isn't too much freedom of movement in Gaza. Excuse me, I just got notifications. So there's not too much freedom of movement because of the war. They're concentrated in one portion of Gaza. So that will change. So the first phase in of itself is it's not a complete peace treaty, but it's a structured ceasefire. So there's hostages and prisoner release. That's what both sides want the most of, right? I would say the Palestinians, they want to be able to move on and rebuild. And Israel, they just want their hostages back and they want to stop, believe they want to stop fighting. I could be wrong on that, but I do. At least the people. I don't know about the governmental leaders. Here's what the end of the war would look like. So there would be a full and permanent ceasefire. So ideally, this is the end of the conflict. If you're a Christian, you realize this conflict's not over. There's going to be a bigger conflict yet to come. We don't know when that's going to be. And that's going to be all the nations surrounding Israel. It's going to be Russia from the north. It's going to be Turkey. There's going to be some pull maybe from the east. So there's going to be pull from Libya and Sudan. So we know it's not the end, but at least this is a temporary deal, temporary peacefire. There will be a complete hostage release and prisoner exchange. That's what we already talked about. Demilitarization of Gaza. Hamas and other militant groups would have to disarm or reduce their military capabilities. That is essential. Hamas cannot remain in power. I want to reiterate that. Hamas cannot remain in power. What they do is they brainwash these Palestinians to hate Jews. They also have military infrastructure and tunnels underneath most of the densely populated areas. Hamas needs to completely go. They need to vanish. And honestly, if I were Israel, I'd still feel a little unsettled that there's still some people that are sympathetic to Hamas. And now you have 2.5 million Palestinians who saw Israel attack them during a war and probably hate Israel even worse than they did. So there are serious logistical problems on Israel's side. So, and what to do with the Palestinians. And so that has to happen. Demilitarization completely. Rebuilding Gaza's infrastructure. This is going to take a number of years and a lot of foreign aid to be able to rebuild it. And they have to be a capable people of rebuilding. The Palestinians need to want to have peace. They need to want to rebuild. They need to want to have better infrastructure. They don't want better infrastructure and they don't want to rebuild if they want to attack Israel again, because Israel just level it all over again. So they need to be extra careful. Political framework. There would need to be a political arrangement for how Gaza is governed. Whether Hamas retains influence, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Hamas is going to be able to remain in power. I don't know if they're going to be able to have elections because they elected Hamas. So I don't know if Israel, as well as the Western world and the Arab countries, can put up with that. A lot of those Arab countries in the Middle East, nations such as Saudi Arabia, they're more moderate. They don't want radical terrorists there. It makes Muslims look bad. It also is not conducive for peace in the area and free trade with what you had with the Abraham Accords. Wouldn't allow that. Jordan doesn't want that either, because all these countries as well, they don't want to be taking in Palestinian refugees. No other country wants them. So none of those, Egypt doesn't want them. They specifically barred them from coming in. Saudi Arabia doesn't want them. Jordan doesn't want them because they cause problems. So there needs to be some plan in place for who is going to govern, because I don't believe the Palestinians are going to be able to just vote. And let me be honest, a lot of times as Americans, we have this viewpoint that we need to set up democracies throughout the world. I think we've learned that nation building doesn't work. You can look all the way back to Vietnam. You can look more in recent history to Iraq and getting rid of Saddam Hussein in the 90s and the 2000s, the war on terror. I think we can see that nation building in the Middle East and setting up democracies doesn't work, because the people don't want it. And democracy, right, is quote unquote ruled by the people. And if the people don't want it, they can automatically elect a dictator, so who remains in power. So something has to happen in that area of the world, and I believe it needs to be run, specifically that Palestinian area, by a country, maybe an Arab country, maybe the United States, some country in there. And I want to be clear that I believe that is Israel's land. I do want to be clear there. So ideally, they would submit to Israel's leadership. Israel would give them the same rights as Israeli citizens, and they would immediately be given all civil rights and the right to vote. But I don't. That would be very difficult to do, and those people probably disdain Israel right now. So you need a third party to rule. Next, or Hamas and the Palestinians won't agree to the new government, and then we're back to square one. Here are some potential challenges. Territory. That's always the biggest challenge in a war. What territory does the loser retain? And what area does the victor gain? Is there any gain in territory or not? So I think Israel has to be careful, because if they take too much territory, there's already a lot of people down there. They're going to be bitter, and it's going to be more densely populated. So you're going to have an even tougher time fighting in a very urban area if this ever happens again. So that has to be considered. Hamas's military capacity being demilitarized. That's going to be tough, because a lot of these Palestinians are masquerading. They're just Hamas agents. So that's going to be an issue. Security vacuum spoilers. If a ceasefire holds, there's a risk of military factions rising up. You see that in the Middle East. You saw ISIS ended up getting replaced by, Al-Qaeda got replaced by ISIS. So there's always some Islamic extremist group that rises up in this area of the world. That can't happen, or Israel is back to square one. They don't want Hezbollah either up to the north. They still have to deal with them a bit in the future. So there's just some issues like that. So the reconstruction burden. Gaza is devastated. Rebuilding will require massive funds. So it's going to require billions and billions, if not $1 trillion, to rebuild Gaza, because it was leveled. That's another challenge. Trust between both sides, because there is none. And Israel should not trust Hamas or the Palestinians. And I actually think Palestinians should trust Israel, but they're not going to, because they just fought a war with them, and that's understandable. Israeli public hostage families and Palestinian public are under pressure. If either side feels the agreement is weak, there might be backlash from the political factions of both sides. So if they think this agreement could just dissolve, the people inside might revolt against it. And a lot of times, the last issue I see is that there are ceasefire breakdowns where they don't hold. And we've seen that a couple different times in this war. So let me give you some more numbers. So 1950 plus are being released. So there was a similar deal in early 2025 that fell apart, although it was recognized that it wouldn't be super long lasting, and 33 hostages were released. So Israel has to make sure they pull their cards right, and they rebuild their public persona around the world and their public image. The United States needs to make sure and Israel, that Hamas is dismantled, while at the same time, you also have to be political so that the rest of the world doesn't think you're doing the wrong thing in this deal. So here's what phase 2 is supposed to include. Release of living hostages, both civilian and military, and more prisoner exchanges. So from both sides. And then there's going to be monitoring and humanitarian aid and release of the bodies. So I'm hoping this works. Stage 3, lastly, would be a full lifting of the blockade and final political structural steps. That will probably take years to figure out what government will be set up there and how it will be governed. So it's really good that this conflict seems to have ended. Hopefully, when this gets released tomorrow morning, that the deal went through. There was no funny business between Hamas and Israel, and hopefully Hamas agrees to be disarmed, and that area, hopefully Israel doesn't have to worry about again for a long, long time. I want to say that this conflict is extremely nuanced, so I could be wrong. If you disagree, comment down below. And I'm hoping this agreement works and it lasts for a little while at least. And I also want people to realize that I think it's pretty definitively clear that in this conflict, Israel was not the bad guy. There are no good sides in the war, but Israel had to do what they had to do. They had to attack Hamas because Hamas took hostages and brutally raped women and children and burned people alive, and there were terrible things done. And that Israel is not the bad guy. The aggressor is the bad guy. Stand up against bullies.